There is something strange about the way we measure economic success. When a country crosses a major milestone, headlines celebrate. Politicians celebrate. Markets celebrate. And in 2025, India achieved one of the biggest milestones in its modern history. Its economy surpassed $4 trillion, a number so large that it instantly placed India among the biggest economies on Earth. For many, it was proof that the future had arrived, proof that decades of reforms, investment, entrepreneurship, and growth were finally paying off. But hidden beneath the celebration is a question that economists have been asking for years. What if becoming a $4 trillion economy is not the hard part? What if the real challenge begins after you get there? Because history is full of countries that grew rapidly, escaped poverty, built industries, attracted investment, and transformed themselves into economic success stories. Until suddenly, they stopped moving forward. Not collapsing, not failing, just slowing down. And once that slowdown began, many never truly escaped it. Economists have a name for this phenomenon: the middle income trap. And whether India can avoid it may become one of the most important economic stories of the 21st century. To understand why, we first need to understand what the $4 trillion figure actually means. Because despite the headlines, total GDP can be surprisingly misleading. Imagine two countries. One has a population of 10 million people. The other has a population of more than 1 billion. Even if both countries produce the same amount per person, the larger country will naturally generate a much larger economy. This is why total GDP tells us how large an economy is. It does not necessarily tell us how prosperous the average citizen is. And this is where India's story becomes more complicated. India's economy may now exceed $4 trillion in total output. But when that output is divided across its population of roughly 1.4 billion people, the picture changes dramatically. The average income remains far below that of advanced economies, far below the United States, far below Germany, far below Japan, even far below some countries that receive far less international attention. This is not evidence of failure. In fact, it is the opposite. India has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of extreme poverty over recent decades and built one of the world's fastest-growing major economies. But it highlights a reality that economic milestones often hide. A country can become globally important long before most of its citizens become wealthy.
And that gap matters, because closing it requires a completely different type of growth. The growth that gets a nation from low income to middle income is often very different from the growth needed to reach high income status. In the early stages of development, countries typically benefit from something simple: cheap labor. Factories arrive, foreign investment flows in, exports increase. Workers move from low productivity jobs into more productive industries. Living standards rise. The formula seems straightforward, but eventually a problem emerges. As workers become wealthier, wages rise, and rising wages create a paradox. The very thing that improves living standards can also weaken the country's original competitive advantage. Companies that once came for low costs begin looking elsewhere. New competitors emerge, and the economic model that created growth starts reaching its limits. This is the point where many nations encounter trouble, because they can no longer compete primarily on low wages. Yet, they have not fully developed the innovation systems needed to compete on technology, research, advanced manufacturing, and intellectual property. They become stuck between two worlds: too expensive to be the cheapest, not advanced enough to be the most innovative. This is the heart of the middle income trap. And history offers several examples. Throughout the late 20th century, many countries experienced extraordinary growth. Some successfully transitioned into advanced economies, others struggled. The difference often came down to productivity, not simply producing more things, producing more value. This distinction is easy to overlook. A factory assembling products designed elsewhere creates value. But a company designing the technology, owning the patents, controlling the software, and managing the global brand often captures far more. As economies mature, value increasingly comes from knowledge rather than labor alone. And this is where the conversation about India becomes especially interesting. Because India is not following the exact path that previous Asian economies followed. Its rise has been unusual. Many countries industrialized first and developed large service sectors later. India's globally competitive service sector emerged much earlier. Software exports, technology services, business process outsourcing, digital infrastructure. These became major strengths. Millions of skilled workers helped build an industry that connected India directly to the global economy. Yet this success created another question. Can services alone generate enough high-quality jobs for a country of India's size? Every year, millions of young Indians enter the workforce. The scale is enormous, larger than the population of many countries. Creating opportunities for such a vast number of people is one of the greatest economic challenges any nation can face. And this is where manufacturing continues to matter. Historically, manufacturing has served as a bridge between low-income and high-income status. It absorbs large workforces, builds industrial capabilities, creates export competitiveness, and supports the emergence of broader middle classes. India has made manufacturing expansion a major policy objective. But achieving it is not easy. Global competition is intense, supply chains are evolving, automation is changing labor economics, and countries across Asia are competing for the same investment. At the same time, India faces another challenge that receives less attention. Productivity is not just about factories, it is about human capital, education, skills, research, innovation, the ability to create new ideas rather than simply adopt existing ones. This is where the future may ultimately be decided. Because countries rarely become high income simply by producing more of the same products. They become high income by producing things others cannot easily replicate. Advanced semiconductors, complex engineering, breakthrough technologies, global brands, scientific innovation. The challenge is that these capabilities take decades to build. There is no shortcut. No policy announcement can create an innovation ecosystem overnight. It requires universities, institutions, research networks, entrepreneurs, investors, engineers, and long-term stability working together over generations. And while these economic debates often sound abstract, their consequences are deeply personal. For an ordinary family, the middle-income trap is not an economic theory. It appears as wages that stop rising, housing that becomes increasingly difficult to afford, education costs that climb faster than incomes, a sense that growth exists on paper but feels distant in daily life. The numbers may continue improving, but expectations begin rising even faster. And expectations can be powerful, because economic development is not only about absolute progress, it is also about comparison. People compare themselves to what they see online, to global living standards, to lifestyles that appear increasingly visible yet increasingly unreachable. This creates a psychological challenge alongside an economic one, the gap between aspiration and reality. And perhaps that is why India's $4 trillion milestone feels so significant, not because it represents an ending, but because it represents a transition. The easy narrative says that becoming one of the world's largest economies means success is guaranteed. History suggests otherwise. Large economies can still face structural problems. Fast-growing economies can still slow down. Impressive GDP figures can still coexist with deep developmental challenges. The real question is not whether India has become economically important. That question has already been answered. The real question is whether the next phase of growth can be transformed into widespread prosperity, whether productivity can rise faster, whether innovation can deepen, whether opportunities can expand quickly enough for a population larger than any other on Earth. Because $4 trillion is an extraordinary achievement, but economic history rarely judges countries by the milestones they reach. It judges them by what happens after, and for India, that story is still being written.